Welcome and what's up, fellow Dragon Link slash Bystial enthusiasts. For anyone who's a fan of the strategy or just happens to be a fan of the dragon typing in Yu-Gi-Oh!, this is just going to be a way where I can yap about my favorite deck, my favorite archetype and strategy, and to take a look back at the performance and kind of what's been going on with the deck throughout the past year. Unfortunately, there's going to be a little bit of doom and gloom involved. I think that's not. I think it's pretty obvious considering that Dragon Link has kind of fallen from grace. But we'll get into that discussion in a second. But I am hoping to point some people into a new direction with the dragon typing in hopes that this deck can live on in a much more powerful and destructive and fearsome form. So, let's get into it. I wanted to first take a look at a list that won a regional right at the tail end of 2023, technically October 30th, but that's still pretty late into the year. The reason I brought this list up is because it pretty much is the final form of Dragon Link after Dragon Link won the World's Championship. Shout out to Paulie Aronson. After the limits to Chaos Space and to Magnamut, we, of course, could definitely feel the consistency hits, but it's almost hard to imagine what Dragon Link would perform with 3 or 2 extra Magnamuts in the main deck, simply because I'm a big fan of not bricking on Bystials, and the Scarm effect, while powerful, is not something that's worth just not having any plays. But I think if we did have Magnamut back to 3, we would all be main decking it at 3 anyway, so it's kind of a moot point. But, of course, Chaos Space being limited to 1 also hurt, because the greatest strength about this deck was not about just full comboing, but the grind game that it created, as well as the card advantage that just came out of thin air from drawing off your Chaos Space and your Regained, and looping your Chaos Dragons to just get insane card advantage. So, shout out to Matthew Bauer for first place with this list. The reason why this list sticks out to me, his choices were certainly interesting, and I'll talk about those in a second, but more or less this is just kind of like the time capsule, I want to call it, version of Dragon Link, where this was in a format where I believe this was after Unchained got the hit. I could be wrong, but I definitely know that Rescue Ace was a contender for best deck at the time, and Rescue Ace was not the most favorable matchup for this deck, as sometimes off of your Link 1 or even your normal summon plays, if they flip one of the back row that just says you're not going to be using this monster as material, it might have just been it then and there. There were certainly other decks out there that were just kind of showing the rule of thumb Konami was starting to apply to the decks that they were beginning to print, which is, every card was either a starter or it had like 3+ effects. And Rescue Ace was a particularly frustrating deck to play against because it just seemed like every monster that they main deck had some sort of way to punish you for just trying to play on your turn. You had an Impulse that was turboing out their guys. You had a Fire Engine that was also drawing 2 and setting up their grave, and also just digging deeper into hand traps to stop you, as well as that was a deck that didn't necessarily care about extra deck spamming. It was very simple. Try to put 4 back row on the field and have enough bodies to extend into something just a little bit degenerate like SP plus Baron. So, again, I do remember that matchup not being very favorable, but Mr. Bauer over here did pretty much crack the code, which is Dragon Link was starting to shy away from the Wombo combo, all gas, all in kind of style that we saw, to you want to draw hand traps, you want to have one good normal summon, and a Bystial grind game, and big guys to kill them on the crackback. It was definitely getting apparent, though, at that point, that the decks were moving away from what we've seen and were becoming a little bit more resilient. And this list just sticks out to me because, like I said, even though this was 2023, technically speaking, it kind of feels like Dragon Link hasn't really moved past this from that point, and this is back when we still had Savage and Baron, so it doesn't really get any better than this, which is sad to say because we're kind of going to go downhill from here. But the lists, or the choices of his list that I did want to talk about was the Rocket Synchron. I know that he was also playing Noctos. Bringing back any of them off of a normal summon would get you instantly into a Savage play. And I know he opted to not play the Black Metal package. He just didn't believe in it. I personally was a big fan of having some sort of way that said, even if you droll me, I'm at least getting his fears up and I'm probably not dying. But again, his list and his theory carried him to first place victory, so congratulations to him. And again, I really just think this is a very important deck list in the Dragon Link history, simply because this was just starting to solidify the very end of this iteration as we know it, since the Bystials have dropped into the game. Now on to the Phantom Nightmare and the April 2024 ban list. As I said, things went downhill from here, and there are two very specific reasons why. Starting with the Phantom Nightmare Core booster set, we had the release of Snake Eyes Poplar, which gave the Snake Eyes strategy an insane combo piece, consistency piece. Just the deck was starting to be... we all knew this was coming. We saw the OCG, but now that it was TCG side, we really just saw how degenerate going full combo and having a deck that said, you're not going to trade favorably with hand traps because it's not like you hit my normal summon, there goes my best plan. It was every possible extender and starter just added another piece, and each one of them represented the full combo just off of one card. So the game was now starting to shift towards something incredibly unhealthy, which demanded everyone to just start throwing hand traps or to have some sort of game plan against this incredibly toxic deck. And you'll notice that if I talk about Snake Eyes in any of my other videos, and especially this one, it's not going to be with a positive tone. I am very, very anti-Snake Eyes for what it did to not just 2024, but the game as a whole. Now, Dragon Link / Bystials didn't exactly have a favorable matchup into this either, as not only did we struggle with Bystials being relevant against cards or decks like Rescue Ace, but now that another fire deck had entered the format, it was going to become incredibly tougher to interact favorably, as all that really came down to was having enough hand traps to stop them where they were. And the difference between combo decks was also starting to be seen, where this grind game that Snake Eyes represented was much, much more powerful than Dragon Link, as many combo decks have to expend resources. Snake Eyes did something incredibly toxic, which was damn near having an infinite grind game with OSS looping cards, Promethean Princess reviving things, Flamberge Dragon basically being Block Dragon 2.0. We know the whole deal. We know the deck is powerful, but it was really just starting to show what a combo deck really needed to be to make it into the 2024 metagame. Now, on to the April 2024 ban list, specifically the Forbidden section, which matters most here. The banning of Baron de Fleur and Borlode Savage Dragon were incredibly detrimental to the Dragon Link strategy. Borlode Savage Dragon arguably is a Dragon Link card, but it was these two that were generic extra deck pieces that many other decks used. However, with these taken out of our deck, Dragon Link players had to ask, well, what else do we play in place of them? What's the payoff for doing this whole wombo combo if we can't play a card that can't counter Nib? So with the banning of these two cards, our deck was caught in the crossfire. And many will argue, and I am a firm believer that this ban list was definitely meant to curb the power of Snake Eyes, given the fact that Link Kuriboh is also up here, which is a card that became insanely toxic for Snake Eyes players to abuse, given that they could dodge targeted interactions such as a Veiler on their Ash. So, a list that was clearly intended to keep Snake Eyes from having access to these extra deck tools means that Dragon Link was caught in the crossfire, which is why you can see my disdain for Snake Eyes. I am a firm believer that this deck is responsible for why Dragon Link is in the current state that it is. It's kind of like if a person can hate and glaze sports teams, this is just my sentiment on these two separate decks and how they've interacted with each other. So, again, this ban list was almost a good... I would argue, but it does accomplish another thing, which is it is starting to shift away from generic extra deck boss monsters. To who you ask, the answer could be different. Maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's not. However, taking away those tools from our deck was certainly one wound we really couldn't recover from. So, the Dragon Link strategy, without Baron, without Savage, I do remember my next best... The ideas that I had anyway at the time to play in the deck were Draco Berserker and Evil Swarm Nightmare. They were good cards, for sure, but they just definitely were not the same things. So, yeah, this is these two events specifically, the Phantom Nightmare Core Booster Set and the April 2024 ban list, I would say kind of signify the death of the deck. Now, I'm sure there were definitely a couple regional tops here and there, but it was very easy to say that this is the moment where the deck fell off. And on to that sentiment, I have here a graph of YCS Indianapolis from this summer of the top 32. Now, this Dragon Link not showing up in the top 32 of a YCS isn't exactly a good indicator of whether or not the deck is dead, but you can pull up regional tops, you can pull up YCS tops. It just certainly wasn't there, and it wasn't having the same presence and showing that it had during the previous year. Now, there were plenty of times where we saw sometimes the Bystials paired with the Orcust. I do remember, what do they call it, HBO, like a Horus Bystial Orcust control deck coming out. But while two engines that are powerful in their own right with some splashability or some synergy could be, a solid strategy in itself, the takeaway here is that there was just clearly another combo deck that was a lot worth more playing at the time than anything else. So if you were going to go combo, it seemed like Snake Eyes was it. And this deck, we all know, just kind of ruled the metagame for quite a few months there, unchallenged. And it got even worse when the Fiendsmith cards were released in Infinite Forbidden. But Bystials did have a good sentiment, or at least a good... the theory was that like a Jerusalem onto a Flamberge trying to scale an IP Masquerena in the grave would be a nice interaction, because IP Masquerena did represent a lot of trouble on someone else's board. But I would not say that the Bystial strategy itself was anything relevant, more or less just relegated to the side deck in the form of a Magnemite and 2 Jerusalem. Truly, I think it's very obvious to say that Dragon Link not having the same presence just kind of shows that it isn't there's just not enough people playing the deck. It simply is that it's just not good. And we can talk a little bit more about that, but we all knew this year was kind of the year of fire, the year of combo. This representation is not a one-off thing either. People will argue, Snake Eyes wasn't tier 0 is tier 0.5. It definitely was unfair. It definitely was the best deck, and it definitely was tier 0. Sure, other things can show representation, but for how the game was warped and impacted by decks requiring that you throw everything in a hopes to stop them, otherwise you never had a chance. I think this is going to give us all PTSD if they ever release another combo deck on this same scale. I want to talk about the fundamental issue, and this is where the gears started spinning in my head. Right after the release of Phantom Nightmare, I definitely remember playing against decks like Voiceless Voice, thinking, well, this is another light-based strategy that's in the format. I like the idea that my Bystials have a good matchup against them. So why does it feel like this matchup is still pretty rough? And then it started clicking. Well, first off, the hand traps that I'm used to either don't work, such as Nibiru, or cards like Veiler and Infinite Impermanence are very hit or miss, especially when Voiceless Voice main decks cards that either punish you for trying to target or outright just say you're not going to be able to target cards anyway, as well as a lot of your interactions were target based, such as Chaos Angel, Bystial Druis Worm, Branded Beast, and whatnot. And another issue was the quality of cards. Now, this is something that really solidified to me when I played Edison, of all things, this year. When you talk about something maybe like Black Wings, as opposed to other decks in the format that aren't archetypically named, where you're just comparing card by card, like, hey, just on paper, one of these things is accomplishing more, and you can definitely see that with cards like Dragon Ravine, side by side with Divine Temple of the Snake Eye. Perhaps this isn't the best example. Maybe any of the Visa Starfrost field spells are better examples, ones that like search on activation, as well as when your deck accomplishes its gimmick, it rips something from your opponent's field or nets you advantage. Whereas Dragon Ravine is a very dated card, and it's very simple. Now, cards that have less text doesn't mean it's automatically like worse. We've seen it with cards like Pot of Greed, where it's the simplest effect ever, but it's still on the ban list for a very good reason. But Dragon Ravine, while foolishing for any dragon, is still a very powerful effect. I just think what the card represents in terms of cost, in terms of searchability, as opposed to something like Divine Temple of Snake Eye, not so much acting as a foolish burial, but almost like an extender. These cards, just side by side, we're starting to see like, okay, maybe the flaw of just putting together the best dragon cards in the game was these aren't future-proofed in the sense of power creep exists, so one of these days they'll get phased out in light of something better. And then you've also got cards like Rocket Recharger and Black Metal Dragon. Black Metal Dragon is one of the staple normal summons in Dragon Link, but as opposed to Snake Eye Ash, this one has one effect, and it is not even on summon. You have to link it off, whereas Snake Eye Ash represents like +7, +8 on normal summon. And cards like Rocket Recharger, many would consider a brick, and while it can extend in some niche situations, this is just something that you play in the deck simply because Rocket Tracer can special it from the deck. It's an engine requirement for the Rocket package to work to its fullest extent. So clearly, card by card, you look at Black Metal Dragon versus Snake Eye Ash or Low, the Prayers of the Voiceless Voice, and it's night and day. The deck is definitely starting to experience power creep. On top of that, something else to mention is because of cards like Rocket Recharge or Dragon Ravine. I mean, the Dragon Link strategy is notorious for bricking, but on top of that, the non-engine slots that you have compared to the newer decks at the time, just it's another night and day situation where it seemed like the design philosophy was crazy value off of one card combos, and then you're backing it up with 20 non-engine, which is, I believe it's unhealthy for the game, but, that is another argument in itself, and that's simply from a principle of homogenization, more, luck-based strategies of, like, just open more hand traps or whatever, but that's neither here or there. Again, this is just posing the objective, hey, look at our decks versus the other decks, and then you start to see why there are holes in the strategy, or this is why the deck fell off. However, there has been new support throughout the year, technically speaking. In terms of extra deck monsters, we did get Arms of Gen X Return 0 in the Terminal Revenge side set. This is a nice card, theoretically, but it's incredibly nuanced, just being able to negate based on what kind of attributes you have in your grave. Sometimes you really just need to get rid of your lights in grave for extension. and that could turn off your access to preventing Nibiru from clearing your whole board. And the Tenpai Dragons, while being a very nice budget option and a good boon to players whose wallets could not be stretched any thinner for full-powered Snake Eyes, this was certainly most better as its own deck. Now, I think Dragoonity could take better advantage of it, but certainly not Dragon Link. You either are playing Dragon Link with a Tenpai engine that could extend, or you're playing the much better, much more consistent, much more volatile Tenpai Dragon strategy, pure on its own. And towards the end of the year, we did get Red Eyes Black Full Metal Dragon, which, don't get me wrong, it's a great card, and I would even argue it's better than Borreload Savage, but this is certainly not enough to carry the deck into a competitive tier, again, of relevancy. This just, some people would argue, even represents another brick, and I can see that kind of standpoint, but I don't think it's necessarily a matter of bricking. It's a great bond sponsor to have, but we just need a better engine to circulate it around. Now, the advent of Bystial control, this is certainly nothing new during this year. I do believe towards the end of 2023, Bystial control was starting to be realized and theorized. Even players like Sean Killian started theorizing lists more recently just for the current metagame. And we can kind of see the difference between, like, okay, going in all wombo combo versus we have a list that tries to play a little lower to the ground. Its strategy is simply just put a bunch of big dragons on board and kill and grind them out over a longer game. I do think that this was the right direction for Dragon Link, or just dragon-based strategies, which was we're going to not focus on the Dragon Link package anymore, or the Rocket package anymore, simply because the payoff is no longer there. Despite Borderline Dragon being a very good card, it certainly just was not worth board getting nibbed, or maybe expending a bunch of resources simply for something that just is not keeping pace with other games with a better grind game, or more non-engine space to stop you from ever getting there. So this list was piloted by Francisco Vargas, first place at the Houston Regional in 2024. August 24th specifically, so congrats to him. Again, I watched his deck profile. I figured the Rocket package would be gone, and it certainly makes sense. While there are still good cards you can make there, like I said, Draco Berserker or Evil Swarm Nightmare, they just kind of aren't worth it at the end of the day. And playing low to the ground seemed to work fairly good for him. He was just trying to put a little more hand traps than usual into the deck, slowing his opponents down and then just killing them with big guys. And then you look at his side deck here, it kind of represents, hey, I'm either going to lock you out, or we're going to play on my terms under very, slower floodgates. And shout out to the Red Eyes Soul. You just got to fit your time card in there somehow. I do notice that he played the Bystial Aliber, but by his own admission, this card was kind of bad. It was more or less the only way to make the Bystial Dispatter. So it is searchable off of Bystial Lubellion, and I've even considered playing this in my own Bystial control build, as sometimes you really just do need a normal summon to play the game, but Bystial Lubellion searching for this kind of feels rough. I'd use it much rather for any of these guys up here. As well as the Fallen of Albaz package has been theorized. It makes your spheres insanely good, just representing multiple disruptions. The bounce, the steal, and then a following banish. Grand Tusk Dragon is also another option to bring off of spheres, although Tenpai Dragon players have been able to take better advantage of that. As well as the Chaos Emperor package up here. Not so much a package, but a single card. This represents another piece of grind game where it can keep recurring dragons, and it establishes itself on board pretty easily for just a 3,000 beater that says we're going to close out this game rather quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, 15 main deck hand traps is pretty insane, which brings them up to, I want to say 45. 1, 2, 3. I'm not going to do the math, but the only reason I don't play this amount of hand traps in my current build is simply because I do want to see my normal summons, as I feel they're very important to the deck, especially now that Black Metal represents a much bigger piece of your own deck than just establishing spheres. But just having access to making spheres in the first place is so important that I just don't think it's worth it to max out on all these hand traps, especially now that it's not mandatory with decks like Ubel and Snake Eyes not being really as relevant as they used to be. So what needs to change? I'm sure everybody has their own idea. We want busted support. We want, another good dragon deck that we could just kind of assimilate. I think the switch from combo to control is the best thing. I think a lot of combo decks in recent history definitely need to be curbed. If Konami is going to be releasing decks, I think it's just in their best interest to say that this represents a good deck that can play a good grind game, play a little bit interactively, rather than just like, here's your searcher, here's your extender, you're going to spam your entire extra deck, and it's just an unskippable cutscene unless you open like 3 or more hand traps. Hopefully we never have to repeat 2024 again, but yeah, the combo to control build is definitely going to be seeming like the healthiest and best option for Dragon Link currently. Many still debate whether you can call it Dragon Link or not. I think Bystial Control is a nice moniker for it, but Spheres still represents a very deadly card, and I think we're past the point of this being banned, as Dragon is no longer in the spotlight, and it's become a fair card over time, which is insane to think, but this tutoring for any dragon out of your deck also being a bounce is just a good card to turbo your whole deck around, as well as backed up by Aridized Black Full Metal Dragon. This is your replacement for Borlode Savage, and it's just a card that says, yeah, while I'm equipped to a trap, good luck getting over me. But obviously, playing a grind game over time, this is chipping them away for attack point damage, and your Bystials are just going to close the game out on a crackback anyway. As we can see with the extra deck payoff, obviously we do have to switch from combo to control now, as with the banning of these two very huge pieces that we've lost. I don't think they're coming back anytime soon either, unless there's like maybe a Rada for Savage specifically, but I really just don't see these coming back in the near future. These are being replaced by Draco Berserker and Evil Swarm Nightmare. While good cards on their own, I don't think the Rocket package, or playing the Rocket package, justifies it with these two pieces, simply because none of them really check Nib, and it's just unfortunate to say that the Rocket strategy itself has just kind of fallen out of favor, only because of what it was able to do with the extra deck. That being said, Borland Dragon is still a very nutty card, so there's a world where these do come back at some point, or maybe somebody just plays some sort of pile of all the best dragons, but I really don't think pile decks are ever really good. I just think that sometimes pile decks have kind of like that Tearlaments effect, where you just kind of saw the right engine pieces or saw the right combination in your opening hand, and it never really mattered because you just had so many different pushes in your deck to play through any board or any interruption. But there's not much we can do currently at this moment. There's not too much agency with the players to justify playing this strategy, although with Fiendsmith being very, very prominent in today's current meta, Bystials do stand a very favorable matchup against them, given that getting rid of certain pieces permanently, like Requiem, or getting rid of all your opponent's engravers, can pose a very big problem, especially when decks are becoming more engine-focused and grind game, than instead of establishing just some huge combo board where even if you don't have access to your Fiendsmith package, the rest of your engine is still taking care of it. There is hope, sort of. The problem with 2025 and all of the support that we can look forward to is that any of these being assimilated into a Dragon strategy means that the name Dragon Link probably won't carry on, as though the Blue Eyes strategy is good, and it does give us a Busted Link 1, it's going to really represent its own more pure strategy, I can see, given that it's focused on synchro summoning its own kind of selection of monsters that just historically really don't work with the Bystials. That being said, if it can be adopted into the Dragon Link strategy in some way, I'm very interested to see that, but currently in the OCG right now, Primite Blue Eyes is putting up very favorable numbers. So if you're kind of looking for something else to pivot to in the meantime, this is looking to be an incredibly cheap deck that is going to come over when it's released around mid-February. So as a budget player myself, that is incredibly relieving to hear. I just know that a lot of the reveals for the printing of this deck haven't been revealed yet, so it's kind of scary to see what they might do to change it up. I think the support's still going to be there, but we saw that in the OCG that the deck, the structure deck itself came with a lot of staples, And I really hope they don't do away with that, as this would be a very good entry deck option for new players. And as well as the Dragon Rulers and Dragon Maid support being released, or announced, and being released in Alliance Insight, if I'm not mistaken. The Dragon Rulers have just recently all come back to 3 with the December ban list, but the Dragon Rulers themselves, while people have theorized that they can work with Dragon Link, they will really represent their own strategy, while they will still be able to make use of cards like Spheres and the Red Eyes package. I think this is just kind of another shift from the strategy where it's not so much spamming links more as it is just good, powerful dragons controlling the game state, which I think at the end of the day has always been Dragon Link's, or at least in current years, that has been Dragon Link's game plan, which is it really wasn't so much about the links it made, but it was more of just like having a combination of things that synergize very well with the dragon typing. So I don't have the official translations simply for clarity's sake. I'm very sorry. But just, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you have seen just the new cards that are coming out. You can go look them up in your own time. But the Dragon Rulers themselves are going to definitely pose, I think, a very competent strategy. How well from a few months' time out now, I'm not sure, but this is definitely what I'm looking forward to pivoting to once they are released. As I've seen a couple of replays just with like kind of in the custom replays, but I'm very happy to see what has been played, and I'm glad it's nothing like overtly degenerate. So there's hope that like this isn't like the tier 0 deck that like you're only going to have access to for the next 6 months before it gets banned. Now the Dragon Maid strategy or the Dragon Maid support, I'm not too keen on, nor do I really care for it. I understand, and at one point I did play in Master Duel. This is before Bystials were a thing. I did play, the normal summon chamber for the tidying, but that kind of has fallen off. We might have to go back to that, but I'm not really a fan of Dragon Maids personally. That's not to say that might be it might be just another central pillar for the Dragon strategy to be able to thrive in 2025. So there is, like I said, this instance to say, hey, this is what we're going to be playing, but there are options out there, which I'm very glad to hear, which just kind of inspires like hope and creativity. So as we get closer to the times where these new cards will be released, I'm looking forward to labbing it out and seeing like, okay, is it still going to be control? Are we going back to combo? Is it going to be some other thing? But that being said, focusing now, I will move on to just my final thoughts for the deck list, kind of just to wrap up this whole retrospective, so to speak, as well as just talk about like what seems to be working. So 2024 has obviously not been a very good year for Dragon Link, simply because the strategy's kind of power crept. It's taken a couple of stray hits due to other decks, namely Snake Eyes. Thank you very much, Snake Eyes. This was a very fun year. But I am very saddened to see the current state of it. I really do want to just wake up sometimes and just, banish things for lights and darks, make spheres representing an FTK in itself. But unfortunately, I have to be realistic and say that sometimes, you hate to see it, but it's an awful thing to watch. But sometimes you just need to hang it up and move on to other strategies. I am very competitive at the end of the day. Not saying that I go to YCSs or even that many regionals, but I never like to intentionally handicap myself if I know that I could be playing something that's just a little bit more well-positioned, which is why I'm currently testing out Sharks. And I am not totally given up on the Bystial strategy currently. While the deck list that I have presented before you is solid, fun fact, I ended up just getting first place with it today at my Saturday locals at TGS Tinley. But this list I don't feel is the best iteration of anything played with the Bystial strategy. I think Bystial Fiendsmith would be a much better pick, given that the Fiendsmith cards just have a near infinite grind game. Coupled with Bystials being able to take out other Fiendsmith strategies. Of course, that would be a lot heavier on your wallet, given that engravers have shot back up again. But for anyone who's just kind of looking for more like a pure dragon-centered strategy, this is kind of what it's come down to. This is what Dragon Link has really turned into since 2023 to 2024 at the end. So going into the next year until around maybe February, this is kind of what's looking like the iteration of dragons are going to be. So again, the Black Metal package has become a lot better thanks to Rage of the Abyss dropping Full Metal. The Bystials themselves, a lot of people are maxing out on the Druis Worms, and maybe even other pieces simply for more dragon-like centered, on pure Bystials, I'm sorry. They might be maxing out on all the names. Personally, I only play 2 of each most of the time simply because I just don't like seeing multiple of the same name, and I just can't do anything with a hand. It's already bad enough when you open like 2 Bystials and they just can't do anything together. But I also wanted to keep the list slim, like I said, just to see more normal summons. Even breaking on Fallen of Albaz isn't the worst thing, because at the very least you can link it off, and then there's a Dark in the grave for any of these other guys to extend into. But you'll see that I'm down to 9 hand traps in the main instead of like 12 or 15. I am playing the 2 tactics because this is insanely good, this format. I deck built this specifically for Ryziel and Malice, although our Malice matchup is awful. The Talents will steal, and worst case you can't deal or link off the Detonator. You can turn it into a Typhon and try to survive from that point. But as you can see, the links, there's still quite a few of them in this deck, but I wouldn't say this is what the strategy really represents. This is more like tools to help you just extend, or it's more toolboxy. Like the Spheres is really the main game plan. The Striker is really just there to get banished off or linked off for a Spheres. I do still play the Dragon Ravine, and Romulus as tutoring for any dragon in the grave is still pretty nice. And then the rest of this is just like link good stuff. But the Axis card is kind of the flex spot of the deck, simply because you really do need to... You just want to have the option to have a big guy there that can maybe deal with the board. I don't feel like Underworld Goddess is the best pick for this, dealing with towers, given that you're not really spamming the board with a bunch of guys. That's more of like a crackback off of a few Magnum searches that you really have that pushing power. Chaos Angel is nuts this format, so I think it's another benefit to playing this strategy, which is it makes Chaos Angel pretty easily. And the downside to playing the Fallen of Albaz package plus the Dark End of Apparition is that it does take up quite a few extra deck slots, which I'm not too happy about, because I do play the Ultimate Slayers down here, and I didn't really deck build for them. I do want to fit a Meteorologic in there, but I really don't think that there's anything worth cutting for it. I feel like all of these options are necessary, even both of the Albion and the Lubellion, because you just want your Albaz to be live in any circumstance. You could maybe theorize cutting the Borlord Furious, but I feel like this is probably the easiest thing to fusion summon with Dark End Evaporation, if that's even worth making with it, unless you just want to use it to extend. Otherwise, this is exactly what the Dark End Evaporation is dumping for you to be able to summon. Side deck, the Nibs are good this format. I've even wanted to put them in the main deck, but again, I don't want to go to 45 because I want to be able to see like live playable hands rather than just like, this is 4 interruptions and a Bystial. The Lancia is for Malice. The downside to this is Lancia kind of hurts us. So this is why I don't think this is the best position deck. I am under the impression that Malice is a bit of a gamble deck, where it's either something that it is completely ignorant of whatever hand traps the opponent has, or that is a deck that is dead in the water simply because of how it wants to combo. And then, you've got your Cyclones down here and your T-Barriers. It's pretty standard stuff, but this is just kind of what it's boiled down to. It is very strange to see a deck kind of transform over time into something that resembles something completely different. Even being on the Albaz, people theorized that back in the day, and I used to think it was Cope, and now it's kind of one of our best Sphere summons, simply because Spheres needs to represent so much more than just one simple bounce. With the Albaz, that technically represents 3 disruptions plus searching a maybe instead of Albaz, just tutoring for your Magnum and stuff. But again, This is kind of the final form of Dragon Link at the end of 2024, so very different from Matthew Bauer's list at the end of 2023. I can kind of keep going on about this, but I've pretty much said all I wanted to say. The recap really being is that I am pinning most of the blame on Snake Eyes' release, that we've lost our extra deck tools. I am also not happy with how decks like that in Ubel have impacted the non-engine aspect of building decks, as while Dragon Link can play a lot of hand traps, its non-engine slots aren't very good simply because the deck just plays so much engine requirements that, sometimes it also is a bricky deck. And in an age where, you can have so much advantage off of a normal summon Samsara D Lotus, or you've got decks like Ryziel where every single one of their starters represents, something that searches something to replace itself, or cards like X Ryziel that are just insane going second. You're taking a look at the power creep, and it is kind of scary. So I really do want to hold my tongue and say this is a good list. And I more or less just kind of want to see design philosophies help the Dragon strategy in the future. Which, you can keep your fingers crossed. Hopefully it ends up like that. But that being said, I've kind of talked on for a while. This wasn't really like something that is necessary. Nobody's clamoring for, Dragon Link theory, Dragon Link discussion. Anybody who's a fan of the strategy is simply just a fan because they like the deck, not because currently, right now, it represents this insane potential sleeper meta pick. So, for all my fellow brothers and sisters out there who are a fan of the strategy, we may have to go through different iterations. We may have to make certain concessions like, the rocket package is no longer really playable or worth it anymore. But there are other engines out there that we can use. It is what it is. But until then, until the next, busted wave of Dragon support hitting the TCG and us finally taking back our tops at YCS, I am just going to be playing this occasionally at my locals and really hoping for the best. I hope that my rambling provided sufficient information just to kind of see how this deck kind of fell from grace. But I understand, it can very much, you can lose the point as you continue to ramble like I do so now. But please let me know your own thoughts. Let me know your own theories. Let me know your own grievances. Or maybe you've got the secret spice or the goo figured out. Let me know in the comments. And I would really love to see this deck take off once more. But again, thank you all for listening. Thank you all for joining me. Despite all of the horrible things Konami has done to us, it has been a great year. And God is good and loves each and every single one of you. See you in the next video.